Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn about DAX User-Defined Functions in Power BI. It's a preview feature that has been released as part of the September 2025 update in Power BI. We're going to learn the basic concepts of user-defined functions or UDFs, and then we're going to have a look at 5 real-world use cases where we can use these UDFs and we can work in a smarter, easier, and a quicker way. So let's get started. What are DAX User-Defined Functions or UDFs? UDFs are basically blocks of code that you can write and use in your Power BI model. Basically, these are written in parameterized form. That means that you write a block of code and you can use it in multiple places in your Power BI model. You can define the business logic once and then you can use it in multiple places in your model. In other words, it's gonna help you in simplifying your code because you won't be writing the same code again and again and again wherever it's needed. You're going to write it just once and then you're going to reuse it in a parameterized form in 1 or 2 lines, and that's it. Also, they provide the programming flexibility to the semantic models. That means that you are writing different UDFs as blocks and then you can merge different blocks of code to use in a single place, or even you can call the UDFs in other UDFs. So essentially you can think of them as custom functions for your Power BI model. Remember that it's still a preview feature, and preview features are basically new or experimental functionalities that Microsoft releases to the users before they are officially launched. Why do we need to use UDFs? One of the main reasons is reusability and consistency. That means you define a calculation once and you reuse it everywhere. Just imagine if you're working with a financial model, and with financial models you have a lot of measures that are using the same kind of logic again and again and again. For example, comparative growth. This is one of the use cases that we are going to discuss. So in case if you want to see the year-on-year growth for revenue, and then you want to see the same kind of logic for gross profit, then you want to see the year-on-year growth for net profit. So all of these calculations, they are following the same logic. That means that you can define some kind of function that calculates the year-on-year growth, and then you can apply it on revenue, gross profit, and net profit within a single line, and you're done. Another use case could be the conditional formatting, and this is also another use case that we are going to discuss in our video, that you have a certain conditional formatting for the numbers, let's say green for positive numbers and red for negative numbers, and you want to apply this logic in different metrics, right? So you can define this logic once in a UDF and then you can apply this logic in multiple places. The second reason is maintainability. As we discussed, that you can define the UDF once and you can use it in different places. For example, if you have 100 measures, and we are talking about like large models where you have like around 100 measures which are using the same logic, and in case if you have to update something in the logic, you don't have to go individually to all of those 100 measures and change the code. You will simply go to the UDF, change it once, and it gets updated in all the other measures. Safer authoring, it means that whenever you are writing some measures, so they can have some kind of requirements that they can accept certain data types. So you can also use UDFs for checking the data types before you are using them in the data model. And first class model objects, that means that the UDFs are living in the model and can be viewed in the model explorer. When we would be working with Power BI, we'll have a look where these functions are stored. Let's talk about using the UDFs in Power BI. You've got 3 important points whenever we are starting with the UDFs. One is enabling, second one is defining, and the third one is managing UDFs. Enablement means that we are going to turn on the preview feature of UDFs in Power BI. Definition, as you can see, this is the syntax that we are going to write in Power BI. It can be written in 2 different places. One is the DAX query view, which is easier to understand for me, and most of the people, they are using this DAX query view. And the second one is Timdal view. In Timdal view, it's slightly different, and usually when you are importing a lot of functions from libraries, then you are using this Timdal view. And I would talk about a couple of resources which are like really useful when you are starting with UDFs, and I would highly recommend that you check out these 2 resources and then start working with the UDFs. Model Explorer is the place where you can manage your UDFs. Before getting started with the UDFs, I would highly recommend to check out the Microsoft Learn website, because here they have given a very detailed and a very good documentation which would help you to understand the UDFs. They have given some examples. You can follow those examples, and we are going to use a couple of examples in our video as well. And then they have given some important technical specifications and concepts that you can really find useful. The second source for the UDFs is daxlib.org, which is an incredible resource, because here you can find libraries of the UDFs which have been entered by the experts, and it's like a huge collection. It's an incredible resource in case if you really want to dive into the UDFs and you want to understand the advanced concepts. The way you are going to go to this website is, once you go to DAXlib, you will click on browse packages, and then you would have all of these libraries listed. For example, if I want to have a look at this library, I will click here and then code, and then I will have all of this code. Simply copy it, and then you would go to Power BI in Timdal view. You will paste it, update the code, and you will get it. A quick look at the dataset that we are going to use in this video. It's a very simple dataset, and like most of the examples, this is a sales dataset. It has got the fact sales table where we have got some important sales metrics. However, in this video, we are going to concentrate and focus only on the revenue metric as well as the currency, as we would be working with some currency conversion as well. Throughout this video, we would be using this Power BI file. You can download the starter file from the link given in the description. And here you would find a few pages that would be having the columns already made. Some of the visuals may or may not be visible in the start, but as we would go through the use cases, then we would have those visuals as well. For example, here, once we build the use case, we would see how it works. Let's get back to enabling the preview feature. So just like any other preview feature in Power BI, you go to File, and then you go to Options and Settings, Options. There you go to Preview Features, and then you scroll down and you would see DAX User-Defined Functions. You have to enable it. Once you enable it, click on OK. Once you click on OK, Power BI may ask you to restart it. So once you have restarted it, then you are good to go with the functions. Now for defining the UDFs, we would go either to DAX view or Timdal view, but I would be demonstrating the DAX view in this. Also in this particular Power BI file, you would find a few tabs with the queries that would have maybe some of them, they would be blank, and some of them would be having some functions. We would go through them step by step, no problem at all. Let's start with the first example. So here we are going to define the function, and this has been taken from the Microsoft Learn website. What you do is basically you define the function and then you evaluate it to see if it's working correctly or not. So in this file, you would simply go to functions. You would have to open it and then right click on one of the functions, quick queries, and define new function. If you click on this functions heading, you won't be able to find the functions. Okay, so you would simply click here, right click, define new function. It gives you the basic syntax where you are defining a function, you're naming it, and then you are giving the logic here. We'll start with the keyword fn. That is easy for tracking, because once you have a bigger data model, it's very easy to track if you have a proper naming convention. As you can see here, some of the functions that I have already defined, I am using the keyword fn. So fn amount with tax, and then I have to define the parameters. Parameters means that the fields that you're going to input into the function. So I'm going to say it's called amount. It can be anything except a few keywords that you can find in the Microsoft documentation, that those keywords are forbidden to be used as some names. And here we are going to define the type of the input. We are going to define it as decimal. We will talk about the input types later on in the video after we work with a couple of examples. So this is decimal, and then we define it, shift enter, and we say amount multiplied by 1.1. So that means it's like a 10% increase or a 10% tax. And to test it, what you can do is simply copy this. In the evaluate statement, you write this, and then you have to give some kind of input. I've got total revenue, which is a measure. I'll select this one, and that's it, and run. So I've got this value. One more thing about this starter file is that I have already created the tables and the calculated columns and some of the measures. As you can see here in the tables, you've got this measures table, and I have defined different measures that we are going to use. We are going to create more measures in this file, but I have defined a few measures that would be used in this video. Total revenue is one of those measures. Once I define this total revenue, I can see the result. Let's see how we can use it in our dashboard. We go to report view. Here I've got this page, and I've got a table which has got the revenue. I've got the tax amount, the revenue with tax underscore calc. This is the revenue that I have created if I am creating a normal measure. Here you can see that this is the sum of revenue with tax. Now we will create a measure using that function. So we would right click, new measure, and here I would say total revenue with tax underscore fn equal to fn amount with tax is the function that I defined. And here you can see that you have to give the input, which is amount, and it should be a decimal input. So I'm going to say total revenue, this one, enter, and that's it. You will bring it into your table, and you would simply place it here, let's say for comparison, and let me just make it 0. And now you can see that this is the revenue with tax. This is like the normal tax measure, and this is the function measure, and all of these values, these are same. So this is how we define a basic UDF in Power BI. Before we move on to the second example, I would like to discuss a few important details when we are defining the function, and that is parameters. Whenever we are defining the function, we may have to define the type of the parameter. If we do not define any type, then the default is scalar. Otherwise, we have to define explicitly if we require any other type. Then the subtype, that is only used for scalar, and that is what we used in our first example, that we are defining the type of scalar, whether it's like an integer, it's a decimal, it's a string, or any other type. The third one is the parameter mode. We'll come back to the parameter mode once we have worked with a couple of examples. Now in the second tab, I'm going to paste the same function, but this time I'm going to define the amount as a different type. So I'm going to paste the function here. Also, what I have done is after the define keyword, I have added the description of this function, what it does, starting with 3 slashes, and then you can describe the function here. So what we are going to do is to replace this with int64 and update model with changes. Update the model. Let's go back to the report view and define another DAX measure, new measure, and we say total revenue with tax underscore fn underscore int, fn amount with tax. Okay, so we have got only one function. Wait a minute, we have done something incorrectly. We're going to go back to DAX, and here we are defining fn amount with tax. Okay, in this function we are saying the same name, which is not right. So we have to write a different name, int, update the model with changes. So now we can see that we have created another measure. Okay, so if you change a name, it does not get renamed, but another measure is created. We'll go back here and we are going to write fn amount with tax integer, total revenue, which is this one, close the parentheses, and we have got another measure. And once we have created this measure, I'm going to convert it to currency and then make it 0 decimal places. Let's bring it in here, and I will bring it next to the function that we created previously. Okay, so now here you can see that for this function, which is without integer but it's like a decimal, you can see these 4 decimal places, which is like 2 3 1 1 in the first row. And for this one, if I write 4 decimal places here, I will see a different number. Why this is happening? Because when we were defining the amount, so in the first function we defined it as decimal. That's why it was taking into consideration all of the decimal places in that revenue, and then it was multiplying it by 1.1. So the numbers after the decimal places, they were retained. However, here what it did is first it converted that decimal number into an integer, then it multiplied it with the tax or that factor of 1.1, and then it created this final value. That is why we can see that the precision is only a single decimal place. Now this might look like a very small thing, but in case if you are dealing with some calculations which are having some kind of multiplications and where the decimal numbers are important, so this might be something that you have to keep in your mind. The third example in this video is about using the UDFs within UDFs, and this is also one example that I have taken from the Microsoft Learn website. Define new function, and then we are going to write some kind of description. But what we are going to do here is that we want to have a discount on the quoted value, and then on that discounted value we want to apply the tax. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to write here fn amount with tax and discount. Okay, now we have to enter 2 amounts here. One is the actual amount and one is the discount. So we would say amount, and here it could be decimal or numeric, it's up to you. I would say numeric just for a change of taste, I would say. And then discount, this is also numeric. Shift enter, tab, and then I'm gonna say fn amount with tax. So I'm defining a function, but within this function I am using another function, and I would say amount minus discount. Okay, so what I'm doing here essentially is that take the amount, which is the total revenue, take the discount, which is the discount amount, that is also one of the columns in the dataset, then subtract the discount from the amount and use the function of tax, which means that you are applying the tax on that discounted value. Okay, we would now apply the changes to the model. Update model with changes, update model, it's done, and we can see another function has been created here. We go back. Now we will define another measure, right click, new measure, and that would be total revenue with tax and discount underscore fn, that's the function, fn amount with tax and discount, and then we have to enter the amount, that is total revenue, which is this one, and then we have to enter the discount. So we have got total discount, you enter it here, enter. Now what we are doing here is total revenue minus discount and multiply that by 1.1 to calculate the revenue with tax and discount. We'll bring in this measure, and as we can see here that this is absolutely correct. Make it to 2 decimal places, so this is absolutely correct. This completes the third example. Now let's get back to the parameters of the functions, and we're going to talk about the parameter mode. There are 2 modes that we can use in UDFs. One is the value and the other one is expression. The value, it's called eager evaluation. That is, the expression is evaluated once before invoking the function, right? So in case if you have like a total revenue which is equal to sum of the revenue column, that expression would be evaluated first and then the function would be called. However, in the expression or the lazy evaluation, the expression of total revenue, which is like the sum of that revenue column, that is not evaluated. It's basically passed on into the function, and then the filter context, if present within the function, or in other words, we can say if we are using calculate in our DAX, then that expression is evaluated within that calculate. So that is basically you have taken that expression and you have passed it on into the function, and then you have applied the filter context, and then you reach the final value. We'll have a look at it in Power BI. We will see how it's different, and then we would get more into the details. Okay, now what we want to do is that we want to calculate the revenue for a product super category. We have got 3 product super categories in our dataset, and we want to calculate the revenue for apparel super category. If we look at this particular expression, what we are doing here is that we are calculating the total revenue inside the calculate statement, and we are saying that calculate the revenue where product supercat is equal to apparel. Now we are going to see how we can use the function for this. We can copy this formula from here. We go to DAX, we would right click, define new function. It creates a new dialog box here, as you can see. Come back here, copy it here, take this query, Control X, and do it here. Close this window. Okay, now what we have to do is we take this part, Control X, and delete this. We say fn calc for apparel amount decimal, and enter. We calculate this thing, and instead of this we are going to write amount, and then we write this. Okay, so this is done. Now we say function for apparel here, and here we say amount, which is total revenue, which is this. Run, update the model with changes. Okay, let's go back to the table. Here we can see that we've got the revenue calc and then the revenue apparel calc, which is basically the normal tax measure as we write. And now we are going to create a new measure. So it's going to be new measure, total revenue apparel underscore function, and we are using the val as the parameter mode, so val as the suffix just for the identification. Fn function, function calc for apparel, and we are going to write total revenue, this one. Enter, and we bring it in here. Now here we can see when we are filtering for apparel, we are having all of the 3 amounts the same. That means it's working. But in case if we switch to athletic footwear, now this revenue should change because this doesn't have any kind of filter or a calculate statement. This one should not change because it has calculate, and this one should not change as well logically, right? But it is changing. That means it's not having that filter context of apparel as the product super category, and that is what happens when we are using val as the parameter mode. Now if I go back to DAX query view, I've got this. Firstly, let me see if I can have the rename here. Actually, it should be something like well, right? So I can rename it here, but now if I just need to remove it and quick queries, define and evaluate. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna just go here and paste it here. Remove this. That's it. Now when I evaluate total revenue, so that's 174. That's not working, right? But in case if I copy this expression, I paste it here and I type EXPR, which is expression, and I define a new function, EXPR, update model. If I go back and I bring in another measure and I call it total revenue apparel underscore FN EXPR equal to FN calculate expression amount, it has to be total revenue. Okay, enter. And now I'm gonna bring it in here. Now you can see that it's working correctly, right? Because the revenue for apparel, that should be $441,000, which is the correct amount here. Whereas this one, where we are using parameter mode VAL, this is not filtering for the apparel. Now there's one more thing I want to check here is when I renamed the function, it got renamed here as well. Okay, so basically what happens here is that whenever we are writing a function and we are setting the parameter mode as well, or we are not setting the parameter mode, by default it goes to val. The filter context doesn't work, whereas whenever we are setting the expression, it works. What is the execution process? Let's have a look. As you can see on the screen, the first step that happens is that the value has already been calculated in the measure and then passed to the function as well. That means that this expression of total revenue, this measure is first executed and then the resulting value is passed into this function. The calculate function is essentially applying the filter on a static value that has already been calculated in the measure. Hence, it cannot filter it according to the apparel. In other words, the function receives the value of the expression. That's why it's called value. Let's put it like that. It tries to put the filter context. It doesn't work. And then the value remains the same. And then here we are just evaluating something like we are categorizing it by region name. We've got the normal revenue, which is the measure of total revenue. And we've got the revenue for apparel. But the filter context does not apply. That's why we see both of these are the same. So what happens here is that when the function is being called, the engine first evaluates the total revenue, which is the same amount as the other total revenue. And now let's have a look if we pass the expression into the function. So what happens here is the first step, the expression of the total revenue, which is total revenue equal to sum of the revenue column. The expression of total revenue in the measure is passed to the function as expression. That expression is passed there. The calculate function is now applying the filter on the expression in the measure. Hence, it evaluates total revenue for product supercategory equal to apparel. So here the amount, that is basically the sum of the revenue column. Okay, and that filter context now gets applied. And now we can see that the total revenue and the revenue for apparel, these are different. So we learned that the parameter mode, it changes how the function is evaluated. It lets this input be influenced by the subsequent filter context changes, as we can see. And in case if we are writing the expression, it gets evaluated inside the function. That means that calculate can change it. The first use case that we have is the period over period comparisons. Quite often we come across data sets, and especially when we talk about sales and finance data sets, where there are metrics that have a period over period comparison, which could be year on year, quarter over quarter, or even month on month comparison. For example, here as we can see on the screen, we have got like revenue, gross profit, net profit. There could be some direct overheads and other financial metrics, which are always using the same logic. The DAX is the same, only a different metric is inserted into the formula. So instead of creating DAX expressions for comparative growth for each KPI, what we can do is that we can define a UDF, the core UDF once, and then we can insert that particular financial or sales metric into that UDF and get the result. Right now, as we can see on the screen, we've got a total revenue, and this is like a normal DAX expression we would write to get a month-on-month percentage growth for total revenue. So we are calculating the total revenue, then the last month variance, and then finally we are calculating the variance percentage. If we have to create it for the profit, what we have to do is copy the same DAX and just replace revenue with profit. But what we are doing is that we are creating these extra lines, which are around 10-12 lines extra. But if we are using UDF, what we can do is that we can define a UDF here and give it some kind of input, which is like amount, a generic word, and then we can create different measures using DAX, using that function and entering the desired input. For example, total revenue and total profit. So here we have reduced the number of lines as well as centralized the logic in one place. And that goes back to that maintainability factor that I was talking about in the start of the video. For example, if you have 10, 20, 30 expressions which you need to update, so you won't be going to each and every expression, rather you would be coming to one centralized place and just changing the logic here. Let's have a look how we can do it in Power BI. Back to the Power BI file, I have opened the tab use case 1. Here I've got the year and I have all the months. I've got the revenue, I've got the revenue last month, the variance versus last month, and variance versus last month in percentage, that is the month-on-month increase or decrease. All of these are different measures that I have already defined in the starter file. Now, if I go to DAX, here the expression is already written, which I have provided in the starter file. What we are doing here essentially is we are defining the function. And as you can see, I have also given the description of this function. So when we would be using that in the measure, Power BI would show us whatever we have written here. We've got the function definition and we are talking about the input. It's going to be a decimal and expression. I always like to use expression because usually the calculations are kind of complicated, or they are using this calculate or the filter context. But of course, like, you can use value wherever it's needed. We define the variable of current month, which is the amount. The last month, it takes the amount, shifts it back by 1 month. Var percentage, that is current minus last month divided by last month, and then return var percentage. And then I am evaluating it to see the result on the screen. Let's run it. So I can see that both are the same. I'm going to go back and create a measure here. So right click, new measure, and we're going to call it total revenue var versus last month in terms of percentage underscore fn. That means it's using a function. And now when I say function month on month growth percentage, when I enter it, you can see that this is the description that we entered before defining that function, right? And we have to enter the amount. So that is going to be total revenue, this one. And that's it. It's done. We are going to bring it into our visual. And let me just rename it. We can define it as a percentage. Now we can see it's absolutely the same. Similarly, we can define something for the last year. Here I see that I already have it. So I'm gonna right click, define and evaluate. You can see here, again, it's the same thing, only we are shifting back by 1 year. If I go back to the visual, and what I'm gonna do here is a new measure, total revenue var versus last year percentage underscore fn equal to, and then fn year on year growth percentage, amount is total revenue. We make it like that, enter, that's it. We make it a percentage and we bring it in here. We can see that the numbers are the same. So this is the first use case, that define it once and use it everywhere. The second use case we've got is the conditional formatting. This is also quite a common function and operation that we usually do in our Power BI reports, especially when we are doing these various reports in financial models and things like that. And what we are doing here is that we set the color formatting according to a certain condition. We define the formatting logic in one place, and through the parametric approach, which is this one, we apply it in different places. That means we can apply it for month on month, for year on year, and so on. We use a Boolean flag to inverse the logic. This is something that I thought might be interesting when we are talking about different revenues and expenses. So we have to reverse the logic. So I added one more factor here as a Boolean. If we look at the function here, it's quite simple. We are saying that take the current period amount, take the last period amount, and if positive is good, you have to take it like a true. If it's not good, then you have to take it like a false. Okay, we define the variance, and then we say if the variance is greater than 0, that means the current period is greater, and positive is good, which is true, then you have to select a green color. This is the hex code for the green color. If it's less than 0, a red color. If it's inverse, instead of true, you have got false, then it's going to be the red for the variance greater than 0, for example, expenses. And if the variance is less than 0, then it's going to be green. And then you return the color. Finally, we define a function here. We take the revenue of the last month, and the Boolean flag. Let's do it in Power BI. So what we are going to do here is, firstly, I'm going to bring in the var versus last month, and then we will apply the color coding on this. As you can see here, we already have this color coding for the column, which is like the normal DAX expression. But now let's define the function one, new measure. I'm going to write color underscore total revenue var versus last month underscore fn, and then function color, this one, versus last period. What is the current period amount? That is total revenue. This one, the last period amount, total revenue last month. And then Boolean operation, it should be true. If the positive is good, yes. Enter. Okay, it has been defined. Now I go to cell elements, this one, font color, and I usually give this a prefix so I can easily trace it down, and there we have it. Now another thing, in case if I want to reverse the color coding, I simply have to enter false, and it's reversed, right? So this is quite cool because we can simply do it with a single keyword. Similarly, we are going to define for the last year, again, we are going to use the same function. So we would say color underscore total revenue var versus last year, and underscore function equal to fn color, and current period is total revenue, which is this one, and total revenue last year this time, and we are going to say true. Enter. That's it. We bring in this function of last year here, and then we go to cell elements, this one, not background color, font color, and we type color. We got this one. Okay, and here we are. So that's the second use case example. The third use case example is quite interesting because now we are entering into some advanced visualization techniques, which is SVG, and quite common these days that we want to use it in the new KPI card, which is not new anymore, and then the tables where we can use some images. What we do here essentially is we create a function containing SVG icons. SVG icons can be complex sometimes because they consist of a large number of rows sometimes, and you want to combine them in a centralized location. So the functions can be a good use for that, where you create a function and you can merge all of them in one place. Then you define the parameters, which is like the icon name. You can call it like the SVG icon that you can see here. It's like the apparel, the sports footwear, and the casual footwear, I would say, or the street footwear. You can define the hex code for the icon color as well. Then using the conditional formatting and selected value, you can change the icons and their colors. For example, here you can see a very short DAX measure that I have created is FN SVG icons. You put the supercat name, which is this one, and within this function I am calling another function, and that is that color function that we created for use case 2. In that we are mentioning the metrics which the color has to be based on. So let's have a look how we can do that in Power BI. In the starter file, when you would come to use case 3 tab, here you would see that I have defined a function which is SVG icons. You've got the icon name, which is a string, and hex code for the color, which is a string. Here I am creating a data table. The first column of that data table is a string, which is the name, and the second one is SVG template, which is also a string format. In this, I am copying different SVG codes for creating the icons. For example, here, this one is called street footwear, and this is the SVG code. Then I've got athletic footwear. I've got this SVG code, which is quite long, relatively longer, right? And then I've got apparel, which is relatively shorter, but this is the third SVG code. Then I'm saying that you filter this SVG table where the name is equal to icon name, and what that icon name would be, that would be input from here. And then we substitute the SVG template color, and you can see the color here. It's defined for this SVG icon. It's defined here and here, okay? And then you return the final SVG string. Let's have a look how we can do that. What we're going to do is to create a measure, and let's call it SVG total revenue underscore FN, because it's based on function, and we're going to write FN SVG icons. Now the icon name, we are going to take the product super category, as you can see in the table below. So product super category name, that is defined in those SVG icons. We are going to take the hex string, and that is, let me just format that. I think it would be better if I do it like this. So enter. Now I'm going to use the other function which we defined in use case 2. The current period has to be total revenue, right? This one. And then total revenue last month. And then it's going to be that Boolean operation true. Close this one, close this one, and we have created another measure. What we can do here is we can bring in the variance first. So we can say underscore FN, and this is the one, right? Also, what we can do is we can bring in the color coding. So everything is very clear for the sake of demonstration. We take it here, color, this one, okay. Now we can see it, and now we are going to bring in the SVG icon. Of course, it has to be set as image URL, and there we have it, okay. So for the month of July 2022, we can see that the variance is red and the color is also red. In case if we select any other month, we can see that the variance is green and the SVG icons also turn to green. So here what we are doing essentially is that we are dynamically changing the icons, and at the same time what we are doing here is that we are controlling the metric, right? So once we change the metric, the colors are also changing here. So that's another use case where we can use SVG icons, just replace a few metrics and we can have them ready. To continue this, I would say here I need to bring in one image. So for this one, I want to bring in field value and SVG. There you go. As you can see here in the filter, I have selected apparel. You can see apparel. Once I select athletic footwear, you can see athletic footwear and then the street footwear. So this is how you use the SVG icons in UDF. The fourth example or the use case that we have is HTML. In this example, what we do is we create a function that contains the whole HTML code. And as you know that for the non-programmers, sometimes the HTML code can be daunting and could be like scary. And what we do here is we create the function containing the whole HTML code where we make sure that all the metrics and other inputs that we would like to have in the visual, they are kept in the first block. And then the third step is to write a DAX measure where we call that function, we input the parameters and we get the result. As we can see on the screen, we have a very simple HTML visual. It's a bar chart which shows the progress against the set target. So we've got like the total revenue target, and that helps us to calculate the percentage, the total variance versus last month. That's another metric that we want to show. And then we are entering the hex codes for the three colors, which is good, neutral, and bad. The fourth color is basically for these bars in the background. And then we are entering the heading. How we are going to do it? Let's have a look in Power BI. In the provided starter file, when you come to DAX Query View and you open the tab for use case 4, you would find this HTML code that we have written here. As you can see that we are defining the function. I'll zoom in so it's better to view like this. So here we've got this function, we've got the actual, the target, comparison value, color positive, color negative, color neutral, color unfilled, and then the title. And we are also defining the data types. Here in the start of the code, we are very specific that this is the user configuration, and we are putting all of those metrics in this block of code. And then we are following the practice of commenting everything so that the code is very well written and it can be easily understood by anyone. Here we are writing some of the parameters like, the if conditions and some of the rendering details that you can go through while working with this code. In the end, we simply evaluate this. So let's evaluate and see what happens. We've got this kind of code. Of course, it's not going to give us any kind of HTML visual. We come back to the dashboard and in the tab use case 4, you would find one visual which is already created. This is using this measure, which is the normal HTML code without any kind of functions. And in this other visual, we are going to use the function. So we'll create a new measure and we would write HTML underscore revenue versus target and underscore function equal to function HTML bar. And let's bring in all of the amounts. So total revenue, total revenue target, this one, and I want to see total revenue variance versus last month in percentage. Then I'm going to enter some of the color codes. For example, I will simply enter 3 different codes, let's say this one, and then the color negative, this is also red, and then color neutral, this, okay, and then we can use something like this. Then we have to write the title. So let's say revenue versus target demo. Okay, enter. That's it. And now we are going to bring it in this visual. We have brought it in this visual. Here you can see revenue versus target demo, 105. The color is quite bright here. And if we go towards red, actually this is a neutral, so this is fine. And if we want to go for a bad one, which is this one, so here we can see that this is a red color. So this is how we can easily create functions for HTML codes. Like the code is detailed and your function is quite simple with only the inputs required. Final use case that we have is the currency conversion. Quite often we come across transactions which have different currencies, like the invoice currency is different than the reporting currency. So let's say if our report, all of that is in USD, but our invoices, they are generated in different currencies, for example, Euro, Great Britain pound, or Czech crowns, or any other currency. We have to convert those currencies into the final reporting currencies. That's also a good use case for the UDFs. So what's happening here is that through the different parameters, we are able to select the destination currency. That means that I want to see all of the transactions in USD. That conversion can happen. I want to see all of the transactions in euros. That can happen. So we achieve that using the UDFs, of course, the parametric approach, and we use the selected value. So let's have a look how we can do that in Power BI. In the starter file, in the tab for use case 5, we have this code which is written for the currency conversion. Here we are defining the function FN currency conversion. We are selecting the table, that's the transaction table, the amount, which is decimal, and we are making sure that this is passed as an expression. We've got the transaction currency and target currency. What we are doing here is that we are selecting the target currency. That is done with the help of a filter that we'll see shortly. And then we go through the month index for the calendar. So what is happening here, if we take a step back and we go to the table view, we've got this Forex rates table. In this, we have a Forex rate for the currency to be converted to USD. And that is on a monthly basis. That means that all the transactions that are happening in the month of January 2022 would be converted using this rate that we have here. All the transaction for February, this rate, and so on. And then if we go to the fact sales table, what we are doing here is we have got this column where we are bringing in the rate to the USD using the month index. We are converting the revenue, which is the normal revenue or the invoiced revenue, into the revenue USD. And then we are also calculating the tax amount. But our main purpose here is like the revenue USD. That's the main interest. Okay. So if we go back and we look at this view, so that's what we are doing here, is that we are taking the month index, we are taking the transaction currency, selected value transaction currency, that's going to be the filter, and we calculate the rate to USD. In case if we want to get the rate of the transaction currency to USD, that's very simple because we have got the direct rate. But in case if we want to get one transaction currency, which is like non-USD currency, into another USD currency, what we are going to do is that we are going to convert one currency to USD, and then from USD we are going to do another conversion. For example, we want to convert from euros to pounds. So we would convert euros to USD and from USD to pounds. This is how we are going to do it. And then in this conversion factor, we are showing that we are taking the transaction currency, converting that to USD, and then we are going back to the target currency. And in the end, we are doing the SumX. So we go back to the report view. We've got revenue in the local currency for CZK, revenue in the local currency for euros, revenue in the local currency for Great Britain pound. Now we've got this measure, which is revenue target currency, and if I pull this up, this is also quite detailed, but what is happening here essentially is that this is using non-UDF approach. For example, if I want to see everything in euros, so you would see that this currency 3260981, this is equal to the target currency. This is the main objective. 544,900, that is equal to 21,680. And I don't think that we need this $sign here for the target currency, so I'll just convert it to a decimal number, if that should make sense, right? So we've got this Czech crowns converted into euros. Euros, they remain the same. This is the main thing that we have to notice. And pounds, they have been converted to euros. Now if we go to pounds, then we would see this number and this number, this is equal. Now we would create a function using the UDFs and we would see how that behaves. New measure, and we would write revenue target currency underscore FN equal to FN currency conversion. Then we say, first we have to show the transaction table. So that would be the fact sales, comma. Now the amount, that amount has to be the local currency. So let's type LC and we have got this. Okay, this is the first one. Then we have to show the transaction currency. So that has to be the currency. That has to be the currency in the fact tables. So we've got this currency column in fact sales, this one. And then the other currency, which is the target currency, that is going to be in the target currency table. Okay. And that's it. Closed. So one more thing I want to point out here is that we also have a target currency table. If we go to the table view, and what we have here is this table that has to be present because this is how the conversion is happening. So in case if you have more currencies, they would be listed down in this target currency table. And that target currency table is also being used here in the filter. Let's go back and bring in this measure that we have created using the function, this one, and I would want to keep it as a decimal number, or let's keep it as a whole number for the sake of clarity. Okay, now we can see that basically these two numbers, they should match, and they are matching here. 18163, 18163 when the currency is selected as pounds. When the currency is selected as CZK, that's 544, 544, 544, that's fine. And when it's euros, 3260, 3260, 3260. So this is how we can do the currency conversion using the UDFs. In case if you want to show the currency prefix, which is like GBP or EUR or CZK, then you can be a bit more creative, and in this function that we have written here in the UDF, you can return something like a text, just like sometimes when we are doing it with the indicators, right? So you would be concatenating the currency symbol or the currency abbreviation like EUR, CZK, etc., and you would be showing the amount that you want to show. So this is the end of the video. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and please let me know if you have any other recommendations and any other ideas about the videos. Also, please let me know what you think about this video and what are the other areas where you are using the UDFs. Thank you very much and have a nice day.